Hello, my name is Mark Gibson, and you're listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, a weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming.
Good morning, you're very welcome to this week's episode of the Signpost webinar series. This morning we'll be looking back on BEEF 2026, the Grange Open Day, which took place, of course, on Grange Research Centre up in County Meath. And I myself was lucky enough to be on a stand there on the day. I thought it was a great day, blessed a little bit with the weather as well. And it was great to meet all the advisors, consultants, researchers, people from industry, and of course lots and lots of farmers there on the day. Paul, you must have been very happy just with the way it went off on the day. I thought the attendance must have been pretty good. It looked pretty good to me, and the bit of good weather a week beforehand is always a big help.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks, Cian, and thanks for your own involvement and support on the day. And you know, there was a huge team of advisors there, and thanks to all of those who were involved. Yeah, very, very pleased. I mean, attendance was exceptional. I suppose the weather in the weeks before it helped. You know, that work had gotten done, and people were freed up on the day. And then the day itself was ideal in terms of not being too hot as we had in previous years, but also avoiding the rain. So no, very, very pleased with the attendance, and also with the with the positive engagement we had in the day. You know, real positivity in terms of the outlook for the beef sector. So no, all very good on the day. Yeah,
brilliant. And for the weather, of course, it did play ball. I've been there some days where we've been overblessed maybe with weather, and people with shiny heads now need to be awful careful, and with sunshine such as we have today. Pearse, was there any stand that you thought got really exceptional traffic, or what did you feel yourself on the day?
Yeah, it's hard to pick out any one particular stand. Cian, there's always a lot of interest in the grassland stand, in the different covers that are there. But there was good bit of interest in the organic stand. I know this year there was some new figures out on it. And then throughout the village, there was, I suppose what we tried to achieve this year was less boards and more practical demonstrations. And I think that's really, really engaged with people, Cian, in that they got the in, and we also wanted to get them in a lot quicker into talking to people. So we kept a lot of the messages at the start of the open day much shorter, so that people could get in and actually start talking to people rather than listening to lectures and that. So I think that really worked all around. So yeah, no, loads of interest and as Paul said, loads of feedback.
Brilliant. I saw that at the Johnstown Day as well, that there were boards there, but there was lots of stuff for people to kind of get stuck into. Yeah. Sorry, I just realised I didn't actually go through the introductions here. So just on my screen here, we have Pearse Kelly, head of Drystock with Teagasc, Dr. Paul Crosson, who's beef enterprise leader in the Grange Research Centre. Sorry, and Catherine Egan, beef specialist based are responsible for the Northwest as well. So Catherine will be assisting us with questions as we move through the day. At this stage, I think we'll ask Paul to share your screen, Paul, and we will vanish from your vision. And Paul, whenever you're ready, thanks very much.
Yeah, and thanks for the invitation, Cian, this morning, and from the team to I suppose give a review of the day, BEEF 2026. As we said at the outset, very positive on the day, big attendance, great engagement. The other thing I want to acknowledge, I suppose, is that it's an industry-wide event. We lead it, and it's here at Teagasc Grange, but certainly we get huge support from industry, from our semi-state partners, state agencies, industry partners, the meat industry, breeding sector, AgTech Ireland. And a huge number of demo farmers who are there as well, that they're really, really important in terms of that, on the ground evidence of what works, what doesn't work, and what impact it has on profitability on their farm. So that's really important. The other thing I want to say is really important that we acknowledge our sponsors, FBD Insurance. These are big events and big undertakings, and we do need a generous sponsorship, and FBD have been our partners in this for a good number of years now. And really want to acknowledge their support on it. Myself and Pearse will go through, I suppose, a number of slides now. We'll really skim the surface. It was a really large event. There's a very detailed booklet, 230 pages. You'll get it on the website. Most farmers that came stayed, a good number of hours, 3, maybe 4 hours. There was, freedom to stay as long as you like in particular areas, and some spent a lot of time in certain villages. So we certainly won't do it justice in the next, 25 or 30 minutes. So there's more detail on the website. I should also say in terms of our media partners, with the Irish Farmers Journal, we had a supplement. You'll get that on their website. We had a tech talk. One of the live tech talks came from the open day. The Young Stock podcast, the most recent one, was with Nikki Kennedy at Beef Open Day. So Nikki Kennedy is our local Grass 10 advisor and led the Grassland demo. And then I should say our other media partner, Agriland, there's a really excellent knowledge hub on the Agriland app. So there's far more information, I suppose, is my general message than what we present here today on the webinar. So just in terms of the high level background, so the theme of the day was driving sustainable performance. And, what did we mean by that? And I suppose there were three components to that. First and foremost, it's about generating an economic return. And what that means is very different depending on your farming circumstances. If you're a part-time, maybe 12 or 15 suckler herd in the west of Ireland, or a 500 head finishing unit, what you need in terms of an economic return is very different. It also impacts on what your requirements are from a work-life balance point of view. And we have a very, very large emphasis on work-life balance right throughout the day. What management practices work from a profit point of view, but also what's practical and what helps from a labour efficiency perspective. And of course, it remains really important from a food production point of view, from a policy perspective, and from a consumer perspective, to have a low environmental footprint. Ultimately, we are producing a food product, and the consumer is increasingly asking, what is the environmental impact of the food that they're buying. So having a low environmental footprint is also a really important point that we wanted to cover throughout today. And of course, our view on this, and certainly from a Teagasc knowledge perspective, efficiency here is key. Efficiency in terms of economic return. And what was really positive, and what is generally a positive feature of efficiency, is that all of those boxes are ticked. The economic return, work-life balance, if you have a streamlined system, a more efficient set of management practices, helps to achieve a more labour efficient system. And also they will tend to be systems with the lowest environmental footprint. We had one set of numbers that maybe highlighted the impact of efficiency. If you look at the year 2024 and compare the top third and the bottom third, you see a very substantial difference in terms of net margin for suckler systems. Similarly, when you have a higher beef price, that margin obviously increases, but also tends to diverge even further. And one important point to take from this is that the top third in 2024 had more than double the profit of the bottom third in 2025, even though beef price increased by €2 a kilo. So even €2 a kilo improvement in beef price didn't enable the bottom third to catch up with the top third in the previous year. So that the message from that is that, yes, beef price is really important, moving from 500 to 1580 in the top third, but you need to bring efficiency with that. The first feature area was our grassland and forage village, and Peter Doyle updated our feed cost analysis, and I suppose it re-emphasised the importance of grazed grass in our systems. If we look at the comparison across the line here, grazed feed, something in the order of 12 to 14 cent per kilo of dry matter. When you get into your winter forage, you're looking at something closer to 30 cents per kilo of dry matter, or 300 per tonne. And your concentrate ration, depending on where we are, and we know that fluctuates quite a bit from year to year, somewhere between 400 and maybe 600 at an extreme high price scenario. But the point being that, grazed grass being a really, really important part of our system, and maximising the proportion of grazed grass in our systems is how we will maximise profitability. And that took us into the village itself, whereby, couple of key focus areas. I'm just highlighting four of them here. There are many more demonstrations, and Pearse rightly mentioned that, we went, I suppose, a little bit even more away from even what we had in the past in terms of boards, onto more technical demonstrations on the ground, with very simple messages in the background. So a focus on lime, the impact of soil pH on nutrient use efficiency and ultimately on profitability, reducing fertilizer requirements and costs, and ultimately, from an environmental perspective, reducing emissions and improving water quality. Of course, having your soil pH correct will help you to grow more grass and grow more grass efficiently, but you also need to have the right varieties in the ground. And, there was a really, really nice demonstration and information on matching varieties to systems, depending on whether you're in a grazing system, a silage production system, or maybe a system where you want a bit of both. Heading date, ploidy, mixture performance, looking at all of the key traits within a grazing and a grassland system that you want to focus on in terms of your variety selection. Our grazing demo always gets really positive feedback, walking farmers through different grassland covers and showing, when animals perform or at what covers animals perform best, what the difference is in terms of post and pre-grazing swards, in terms of, the level of performance that you are likely to achieve, and what that means in terms of overall annual animal performance. So really positive feedback on that. Of course, we like to have long grazing seasons, but we do have an inevitable winter feeding period and an indoor feeding period. So the challenge there is to make quality silage, or make appropriate quality silage for the animal type that you're feeding. If it's a dry suckler cow or a finishing animal, very different feed requirements, but you need to have a plan to produce feed of the appropriate quality. Here, one of the focuses was the importance of soil fertility. If you're achieving, say, a 5-ton crop with a high fertile soil or good soil fertility, you will achieve that something towards the end of May, 72 DMD. If you have poor fertility soil, so it's taking longer to achieve that level of yield, you're looking much more likely to have a lower DMD, probably closer to 62 DMD by the time you reach that 5-ton crop. Sometime in the middle of June. So the importance of soil fertility in making silage quality silage was featured here. Of course, within the Grassland Village, we've also always had very good input from the Signpost team, from the ASAP and Better Farming for Water programs. So we focused on P and N losses. How was P lost? How was N lost from farm systems? In Grange, we are in the Boyne catchment region, so we are part of the Boyne action plan. So we have an action plan for the Grange farm, and we use that as a sort of a template for how you can manage P losses and minimize P losses in grassland systems. Moving on to the suckler systems, we ran our analysis in terms of the different production systems, what level of profitability was achievable, and we were assuming €6.50 base price in this analysis, and what the impact of the various systems were on greenhouse gas emissions per kilo of beef, so emissions efficiency. And I suppose the positive from this is, if we looked at previous open days, across the board here, we're looking at €1,000 plus net margin per hectare. So that was a really positive message. And indeed, if you look at our high performing systems, where you're producing the top 25% prices for your weanlings or your bull beef system, closer to €1,500 attainable in these systems. So a very positive overall message in terms of profit that is achievable. But of course, that's only achieved if you meet all the efficiency targets that need to be met. And that's around animal genetics, animal health, grassland, and so on. So we looked at average daily gain, calving rate. So if you look at your animal performance traits, if you like, age at first calving, each of those having a really important impact on profitability. So if we look at our change in profit per cow, €140 less if your average daily gain declines. If your calving rate declines, about €134 less. And all the detail around these scenarios are in the booklet. Age at first calving, about €90 reduction. Equally, if we look at our grazing management and our grassland technologies, clover in the sward worth about €110 per cow. Grazing season length about €90. Herbage utilisation also having a big impact. And again, going back to the general principle of economics and environmental performance moving in the same direction, where we have lower performance, we also increase greenhouse gas emissions per unit of beef. So, the general message being that there are a lot of win-wins out there, and improving profitability will tend to reduce greenhouse gas emissions per unit of beef. We had some analysis on the cost of carrying a cow for the year, coming in at in and around €1,000 per cow, and that's per cow calf to weaning. So a take-home message from that overall village and that overall suckler system stand was to make your farm labour efficient to achieve maximum technical performance, improving profitability and reducing carbon footprint. Again, very similar message around dairy beef systems. A very large feature, and big input from our colleagues in ICBF on this, on CBV, on the commercial beef value. And just looking at the data from Grange, 5-star versus 1-star CBV animals, 21 kilos heavier, slaughtered 27 days earlier. Calf price was greater for the 5-star, so €55, but €170 higher carcass value. So yes, there was more paid in terms of calf price, but that was much more offset by the higher carcass value achieved at an earlier age in that system. So again, going through the village, what were the key messages around farm system, matching to land type, selecting the breed type that's suitable for the system you want to operate. Animal performance, again back to CBV, but also a big focus on animal health, planned health, having a planned health program, regular weighing, measuring and then managing based on the outcomes from that. Grassland management, I've touched on this already. Soil fertility, grazing, with an excellent demonstration on grazing infrastructure, and again much more detail in the booklet around the cost of grazing infrastructure and the benefit of grazing infrastructure. And again, making high quality silage, particularly in dairy beef systems where there isn't, there aren't maintenance type animals that you might have in a suckler system. All your animal categories in a dairy calf to beef system, first winter, finishing animals and so on, require high quality silage. So a big focus on that in the dairy beef village. Growing and finishing cattle. So we leaned quite a bit on the Beef Quest project that's led by Paul Smith and Tomas Burke and John Smith were the world scholars leading the stand on this. And some really interesting information coming back from the Beef Quest program. And on this project, we've gone out onto farms and we've measured basically everything we could on the farm from an environmental perspective, from a facilities, housing, grassland infrastructure, and most importantly, animal performance. And what we've found here is that if you compare the bottom 25% and the top 25%, in their second winter or at their second winter housing date, there was about 150 kilo difference between the bottom 25% and the top 25%. So the top 25% were pretty much bang on target with our blueprints, but the bottom 25% being quite a bit behind that. A similar story on our dairy calf to beef systems. In this case, it was close to €100. So the gap wasn't as great, but to some extent, perhaps due to the fact that the actual targets are a little bit lower, but about 100 kilo difference here. Again, the top systems being bang on target with our blueprints. So the next phase of this project is to use all the environmental data, all the management practices, feed quality data, housing data, animal health practices, and to try and identify, what are the key levers that we can pull here to enable this bottom 25% to move up to that blue line there. More information within that village. So we always have enormously positive feedback on the finishing demo. And again, looking at the 2025 national average prime beef cattle performance, I'm not going to go through all the detail here. Again, it's all, the slides will be available and it's all in the booklet and online. But the percentage of steers that were in spec, if you look at age, carcass weight, conformation, fat score, 50%, 63% of heifers, and 23% of young bulls. So, a huge number of animals that are going out of spec. So these finishing demos been really, really important to help farmers identify animals for drafting and drafting at the optimum carcass specs. Of course, there's always a lot of interest in the cost of producing cattle and the production cost. David Argy had produced some numbers earlier in the year. We redid those numbers for the open day and presented them on the day. So you can see here for our standard 2-year-old steer system, €1,170, and for our heifer system, about €734. Now, of course, that's the cost of bringing the animal from purchase through to finish. You have to add in the cost of the animal itself into these, divided by the carcass weight, and you get a sort of total cost of production per kilo of beef figure. And of course, that will vary from farm to farm. Huge variation, firstly in terms of the purchase price, but also in terms of these figures, duration of winter, cost of feed, and so on. So these are indicative values just to give some indication of the cost of production in these systems. And as always, a lot of interest in those numbers. Within this village, there was a good conversation and a number of stands around methane mitigation, both in terms of feed additives, but also in terms of breeding. We summarised much of the work from Teagasc Grange both for natural ingredients, so brown seaweed, our oils, linseed, rapeseed cake. I know there is a full webinar on this in a number of weeks' time. So good interest in this. What level of reduction was achievable from these natural ingredients? Equally, if you look at our synthetic dietary feed additives, so calcium peroxide or Trinop, the Bovaer product, and a very wide range, particularly in terms of the calcium peroxide product, 1 to 29%, at its best, equaling the Bovaer product, but certainly a lot of variation in that. Equally variation in the methane yield reductions in the calcium peroxide product. But so a lot of interest in this information. What is possible in terms of our feed additives and what products are actually out there. From a breeding point of view, I suppose a couple of different projects were highlighted on the day with the Methane Predict project, which is looking at, trying to generate markers for methane efficiency. And we had the MAGS project, so methane abatement in grazing systems. So both DAFN funded projects, all very well acknowledged on the day. If we look at the MAGS project, one of the tasks there is looking at divergence in methane efficiency or predicted methane efficiency. So we can look at our most efficient animals, which are, somewhere between 12 and 13, 14 kilos or grams per day less than your baseline animal. Compared with your higher efficiency animals, which are up to 20 grams per day greater. So looking at, testing these breeding values, overlaying on these genetics, different feed additive treatments to see can we get either synergistic effects or what the impact of those feed additives are for those various genetics. And just my last slide, and I'll hand over to Pearse then, is just to highlight that, there's also, I suppose, an opportunity to meet advisors on our advisory stand, a big impact or a big presence from our education partners, both within Teagasc from the Teagasc Agricultural Colleges, but also from the third level colleges. The Teagasc Rural Economy Programme, in terms of the most recent data from National Farm Survey, a lot of focus on our generation renewal program that's on at the moment. Really, really important as well. Organic beef systems, always get good interest. Pearse mentioned that at the outset. Our first data from the Grow Farms project in terms of comparing conventional and organic systems was presented on the day. AD is an area of growing interest. It's a research area we have here at Grange. Has featured a lot in the media in recent times. And again, on the day, we had big interest in visiting the AD plant and learning more about the anaerobic digestion research at Grange. Forestry, we always have good interest in forestry, depending on the part of the country and the background of the farmer and some niche interest they might have. And again, we had our forestry team available on the day. And of course, the Department of Agriculture. And I should mention Borbia in terms of their presence there on the day as well. So I'm just going to hand over to Pearse. We had a survey carried out in advance of the open day to, I suppose, get some feedback in terms of what farmers felt were the main challenges, main opportunities, and main discussion points. So Pearse, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Paul. As Paul was saying, we asked clients to come in and do an online survey. You couldn't say really that it's representative of the whole country. That's something that the National Farm Survey would do, and the National Farm Survey brought out results this week. It's something we did in previous years for open days. This year's the questions that we were looking to gain answers on were around labour efficiency, impact on profitability, impact on work-life balance, also looking at changes to systems, what was happening on beef, dairy, calf to beef systems. Was there changes happening out there? What was driving those decisions? What were people likely to do on those systems in the coming 3, 4, 5 years? And then the whole area of succession as well. There was a couple of questions around that. 303 beef farmers came back and answered those questions. It was, as we said, in May this year. The majority would have been Teagasc clients, small number would have been non-clients, and that we would have ran the survey at a couple of open days as well, so where people had the opportunity to follow a QR code and go in. And one of the things we found on the survey was that profitability and work-life balance and labour efficiency are all tied in together. And that's very strongly came out of the survey. So when we asked them, the participants of the survey, how many were working off farm, 63% came back and said, listen, I do have an off farm job as well as the farm. That's slightly higher than the national average. So figures would have come out from the National Farm Survey this week to say a little bit lower that, but in the people that responded to this survey, there were 63%, and 81% of those of that group said they were working at least 30 hours per week on the farm. And then we asked within that group a couple of questions, and some of it, lots of questions asked, but two things that came out and stood out for me was that cohort of people who are working off farm. When we asked them how many of your days annual leave from your job, from your full-time job, do you use to work on the farm? On average, it came back as 14. Now, listen, some said more than that, some said less, but 14 is a significantly high average. You think people have 3, maybe 4 weeks holidays in the year to be using up 2 weeks of that to be working on the farm. How sustainable is that in long-term future? The other standout figure was that on average, they were working 25 hours per week on the farm, as well as their full-time job. So if you're working at least 30 hours, maybe some working more than that, 40 hours, and then an average of 25, you're getting the big hours per week overall in the week. A couple of other standout things was that 48% said they didn't have any other interest outside the farm, and no hobby, no sport. 60% said that was time. Listen, that we could argue that maybe for a lot of people they don't have a hobby or a sport, and it might not necessarily be farmers, but it was just a standout figure, I thought. And then 80% said they did use some form of paid labour, albeit less than 150 hours in the week. 31% of the farms then came back to say, interestingly, that they found it very hard or next to near impossible to get someone to help them work on the farm, that's say outside help. A lot of them were using family labour. So I suppose the key thing from this was there's a big connection with work-life balance, the work and a lot of interest on the day and a lot of interest in this board. So then we kind of looked at the different systems and we said, what are the issues? And we looked at suckler farmers, and what we found was on the suckler enterprises is that 67% of them do have sucklers. That's interesting, an average of 31 cows. So higher number than average than, say, the typical national average would have replied to this. You'd be typically national average would be around 17, 18. But interestingly, 87% of them said they still plan to have suckler cows in 5 years' time. But when you delve a little bit closer into the survey, there was concerns there around workload, especially those who were working off farm. And also that cohort of people who had suckler cows were, for the most part, that little bit older. And they were more approaching retirement age. And they were concerned that the next generation on, they may hold on to suckler cows, they may not, but if they do, they were concerned that they may not hold them at the same level, because if they're also working off the farm, suckler cows' workload is an issue, and as I said, age. When we asked those who had exited, who no longer had suckler cows but did have them in the last 5 years, why did they exit? Kind of predominant answer that came back was, listen, it's a labour-intensive enterprise, calving cows, getting cows back in calf, sick calves, different things like that. It's difficult with an off-farm job. And those who had reduced, they said, listen, I'm reducing mostly because I'm getting older, so I'm not going to operate at the same level. I'm approaching retirement, so I'm cutting back, and I plan to lease out maybe the farm and that. So that was kind of the overshot of the suckler enterprise. As you move on then to the dairy beef enterprise, we know a lot of people now have moved into dairy calf to beef as the dairy herd has increased. 35% of the respondents to the survey said they were rearing dairy bred calves at some level or not. On average, they were rearing 68 calves, so significant enough number of calves being bought in each year. And most of them expected that they would continue in the next 5 years. Now, again, that's kind of a little bit at odds with some of the data that we're seeing, in that we're seeing a high percentage of attrition in dairy calf to beef over the years when we've done previous surveys, that people that have dropped out of calf to beef for different reasons. But interestingly, for those who responded to this survey, a third of them said they actually expected to increase the number of calves they're going to rear. If we ask those who had actually, what are the concerns around dairy calf to beef, there is a concern in the respondents to that survey around margins. So as Paul said, really good price in 2025, really good margins across suckler to beef, calf to beef. But beef prices since dropped, calf cost has gone up significantly in 2026 compared to 2025, where it already rose compared to 2024. So there is a concern in the respondents to the survey that, if that balance doesn't reshift back, They may not increase, or they may not continue with dairy calf to beef at the same level. For those who did get out of calves, who were in calf to beef and got out, we asked them, why did you get out? It was the same reasons: cost of calves, the returns, moving to lower labour systems. And for those who were thinking about getting out, workload again was a side. So workload is a big thing that's coming through. And then the last group we asked was, there's a big cohort of people who don't have suckler cows and don't buy in calves, who do buy in cattle, to buy weanlings, runners, stores, yearlings, and that it is a low labour system, and that was acknowledged by them. They said the reason they're in that system because of the low labour. A lot of these people are working off farm. Third of them, again, a little over a third, were in this system. But 40%, close to 40%, had said they changed the type of system they've been in the last couple of years. And this is typical what we see with people who are buying in cattle. They're chasing value to a large extent, and then they're looking at the whole turnover. So when people are making a reasonably good profit per head, they're happy to turn them over fairly quick. But as the price of stores and the price of yearlings and weanlings goes up significantly, turnover becomes an issue. So again, economic pressure, rising cost of cattle, search for better value is what's changing those systems. As we moved on then, next slide there, Paul, please. Yeah. As we moved on then and looked at, where were people investing? 70% had said they had invested in the last 5 years, and again, an equal number, a little bit more, plan to invest in labour efficiency in the next 5 years, with a quarter saying they don't plan to invest. And when we look at the things that people are investing in, it's not around high-tech stuff. It's around making life easier, making less hours working on the farm, so better housing and handling, better yards, putting in paddock grazing, making more use of contractors, calf housing. And then other areas around vaccinating to keep calves healthier. New technologies, while it was in there, and the likes of the collars and different things like that, people are investing in those. But for the most part, it's the kind of better handling facilities, better housing, make life easier, so that when I come home from the job, I don't have as much work to do. When we asked those who didn't invest in the last 5 years or don't plan, listen, finances were one of the big reasons. They don't have the money, return on investment, questioning if I do put this money in. But a big cohort of that group, of that 25%, were approaching retirement and were saying, listen, I've already invested in the farm. It's up to the next generation coming after me to invest in this farm. Or they don't have someone coming on and they're saying, listen, I'm approaching retirement. I've done my money into this. I'm saving money now for retirement. As we move on then, around succession, as we moved it into succession, we asked a couple of questions around succession, and we found was that it was relevant to 60%. But interestingly enough, 25% of that group said, listen, I've no successor identified, which is a little bit of a concern, obviously, because, down the road, that's going to weigh heavily on people. And another 25% who do have a successor identified, or maybe more than one successor, haven't actually taken any formal steps. But I suppose a positive thing is that actually 16% of these 300 farmers responded that they're in a registered farm partnership. That's really positive, because that's a move in the right direction. A lot of people would associate registered farm partnerships maybe with dairying, which is a more higher profit system. But it's good to see that it's also happening on beef and sheep farms as well. And what are the kind of things that are coming back in terms of, from the survey? What's the pull, I suppose? And what a lot of them are very clearly coming back in that survey was saying, listen, making an acceptable income for the farm is a big thing, but also quality of life. So it's not necessarily maximizing profit. Nobody's saying that, the successor will only come back if they can make a full-time income from this. For a lot of people, they accept and they know that the successor is not going to, even though they may be making a full-time income, some of them on it, they know that they're whoever they're passing on to the farm is probably going to have to, in a lot of cases, work off farm. And it's more about quality of life than necessarily maximizing income. So that's really, but at the same time, people aren't going to work for nothing. So you have to have a viable income for the hours that you put in, but also have a manageable lifestyle. And then when we delved a little bit more into that, we looked at it and came back and said that, people were looking at this kind of from both a defensive and a proactive. And from a defensive, what they were saying really is that, they need to keep costs low. They need to address labour shortages. And contractors are a big part of that, making good use of contractors. But also recognizing that there are personal constraints. So every farm, a lot of farmers, most farmers also have outside interests outside of their job and their farming. So they have personal interest in their family, but also other areas as well. So you have to take that into account and build that into any plan that's going forward. And in terms of proactive responsive, then, improving profitability, and Paul mentioned it there, through efficiency. And the big part is, I want to make my farm more efficient, both economically, but also labour more efficiency. A lot of beef farmers will tell us, it's time poor is what they are, more so than economic poor, because they've reasonably good incomes maybe off farm. Farmers making a certain level of profit, but it's time is where they're short. So small number are talking about expanding, and then the long term viability is what everybody's trying to achieve. So my last slide then really is, one of the key messages we were saying from the very first board of the open day was that, efficiency is important, profitability is important, but at the end of the day, we have to look at the bigger picture. What's an important income for one farmer won't be necessarily for the other. So for some people making 5,000-10,000 euro, ideal. For others, they have to make 100,000 because it's a full-time job. Making the farm more manageable. And that's whether you're full-time. I've talked a lot here this morning from the survey about the part-time farmer. But we also do have a lot of full-time beef farmers. And they're also saying, the amount of hours they put into that full-time farm has to be manageable. And the last point what we're saying, and manageable brings in labour efficiency, safety around handling, and all of those other things. So making the farm practical to run. And then there's a recognition now, and very strongly came out from the open day, and the feedback we got is that beef farming and farming in general has to be attractive. So if the next generation is seeing that it's a slog, and okay, there can be a living to be made from it, but there's a lot of hard work involved in it, they may or may not be that interested in continuing at the same level or at all. So we need to make it more attractive, and we need to bring those people in, the next generation, sooner into the decision making on the farm, so that they feel they have a part. And that's really where the registered farm partnerships can have a big role to play. So that was kind of a snapshot, as I said, of the survey. I think it fed into the open day overall, Paul. Throughout the day is what we were trying to show: technologies and efficiencies to both improve profitability, but also labour efficiency. And I know, and Paul can talk about it in a second, it's also going to be having an influence on some of the research that we're going to be doing in Teagasc over the next couple of years as well. So I'll leave it there.
That's great. Pearse, thanks very much. Just on your last slide, Pearse, the attractiveness, do you think it's more on the profitability side or more on the manageability side? Do you have a comment, or is that, I know it's...
Listen, if you're full-time farming, it's going to be on the profitability. It has to be. If you're full-time farming, you have no other off-farm income, Cian, 100% profitability. It either works for you, it doesn't work, and you'll put in whatever hours, but it still does have to be manageable. But definitely on the part-time, if someone's working a 40-hour a week, they can't afford to put in 30, 40 hours a week. Like the survey showing there an average of 25. But what's frightening within that survey is the variability within that average of 25, and you can go back along the survey and see someone that says, I'm working 40 hours a week, but I'm also working 30 hours a week on the farm. And the point we were making is that might be fine for you to do. People might say, I'm happy out. I don't want to take holidays. My holiday is coming home and bringing in bales of silage and making silage and, herding cattle and doing a bit of fencing and doing a bit of drainage. That's my holiday. But is that what the next generation coming on up next sees? Do they want to continue that on? And I think that's where you need to make it that bit more attractive and be cognizant of the fact that, yeah, perfect, 100%. It's of interest to you to do this, but, will the next generation continue that at that level?
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks, Pearse. Yeah, that's a very detailed answer. Yeah, and Paul, just something popped in my head, my own thoughts here. The methane production from the sires. When we look at the methane, so on this webinar, there's an awful lot of interest in that, the environmental slant and methane, carbon. That whole field is a big thing. And just looking at the differences between sires, is that primarily productivity, or are there other processes at work there?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. I suppose that is part of what we're trying to tease out in the project that's currently running. So we purchased in calves, a divergent in predicted methane output. And what we'll measure basically everything on those: feed intake, animal performance, right through to carcass traits. And obviously we'll measure methane right through the lifetime as well. So what we're trying to do is see, are there certain traits that are contributing to that lower? Well, firstly, I suppose, to do the predictions can we validate them? In general, when we have gone to validate traits, it's worked reasonably well if you have the suitable or sizable enough numbers. So validate the trait. In other words, do the high equal high, do the low equal low when we measure it. And then to see, are there any traits that move in that same direction, or any traits that contribute to that? So are the highs, for example, maybe they're higher intake animals as well, maybe they perform better as well, and maybe not. The ideal would be high performance, maybe moderate intake and low methane. That's the ambition. But obviously you have to breed for that. So the first thing you need to do is generate the traits, assess the traits, and provide yourself with an opportunity to breed for those traits.
Okay, thanks, William. Very interesting, yeah. I just remind people the Q&A function is there at the bottom. So if you have questions on anything that has gone before, please do so. And often the discussion at the end here will generate extra questions as well. Catherine, there are questions coming in there. Do you want to put one or two of them to the panel there, please?
Yeah, lots of questions coming in here, Cian. Two great presentations. I think, Pearse, you kind of touched on it there. One farmer commented, 14 days is nearly 3 weeks annual leave. So if you're working a 5-day week, it has a huge impact on personal and family life. So really agreeing with what you've said there in the presentation. From a labour-saving point of view, what labour-saving devices are being used on demonstration farms that are labour efficient, and what could perhaps reduce annual leave days to operate their farm system?
Yeah, so we are seeing some of the newer tech coming in now, Catherine. The obvious one is the collars that are coming in, and this is around heat detection, also picking out animals that are, maybe close to calving, and also showing up signs of health. But I think, sometimes we stand back and we look at the labour saving techniques and we think, there's some new off the shelf brilliant technology that come out, or an app for your phone and that. And they're brilliant, but often it's the more simpler things that, that what soaks up time on a farm. And if it's herding cattle, or it's getting cattle in for testing or dosing or treating a sick animal and that, that's really what soaks up people's time in a lot of cases. And that's where we see a lot of people are putting investments into, putting in roadways, putting in paddock systems so to get animals out back into a handling unit quicker, putting in handling units and also safer handling units. And that the other area as well, what we're seeing a lot of people doing is moving more towards vaccination. So sick animals, we know, soak up time. So again, we know from vaccination programs and that they are costly and that, but they're a 1-day job or a 2-day job, and then you have much healthier animals and much more likely it's an insurance to cut back in terms of workload around that area. So those are the kind of areas where a lot of people are focusing on. But as I said, there are the collars, there are more tech coming there. There's things coming down the line like virtual fencing and that, and probably coming a lot faster maybe than we realise. It's starting to move in. Only heard earlier this week of a beef farm that's using virtual fencing. So we are moving towards those higher tech areas. But sometimes when you stand back and you look at those, you can say from an economic point of view, they might not make huge sense, but from a workload point of view, they make a lot of sense. Even just talking at a farm walk there last night to someone, I was talking to Cian earlier on about it, about someone that had purchased a mobile handling unit for their sheep farm. And they were saying, that in itself did two things. One, it made their life easier, but it also made life easier for people who are working with them, their kids, a lot more easier, and were a lot more willing to come along and help with handling animals when they had this mobile handling unit. So, something like that, you might stand back and say, big investment, but long term it's not.
There are some options there for them to speak with their local Teagasc advisor in relation to TAMS grants that's available for some of the things you've mentioned there.
Yeah, you take there, yeah, absolutely. There's TAMS grants there as well. And, there would have been TAMS grants there in the past for automatic feeders and different things like that. So, they're all part of it as well. Yeah.
Can I just come in there for a second? I was kind of wondering, in this part of the world, there's a huge amount of part-time farmers, and maybe, what are the areas to focus on for efficiency, but maybe just getting a handle on what they're spending their time on. Would that be a good start, do you think, Pearse? Or what is the best way for, a part-time farmer? How should they assess that?
Yeah, listen, one of the key things that came out of the open day is, you can't manage what you don't measure. So, even, keeping a note, a recording, or, and sitting down and say, well, what am I spending most of my time on? And At the previous open day, that was what a lot of the questions we asked in a previous survey, and what we found was that one of the big areas that people were spending a lot of time on in the year was winter feeding. So feeding animals over the winter and having and looking to improve the efficiency around that, Cian. So coming in the evening and spending 2 hours feeding cattle because they were in 6 different sheds, and maybe having to bed them and scrape yards and do different things like that, and that was soaking up time. And that was an area where a lot of time was being taken up. Yeah.
Thanks, Pearse. Back to you, Catherine.
I suppose, Paul, there's a lot of questions coming in on your presentation there as well. The cost of keeping a suckler cow, you mentioned €1,000. Can you give a breakdown of the approximate figures that make up the €1,000?
Yeah, and that created a lot of debate and discussion on the day. And obviously that's an indicative figure. Again, every farm is different, but it does highlight the cost of carrying a suckler cow. So that €1,000, approximately half of that is feed, or a little more than half of it is feed. So not surprisingly, that's the single biggest cost factor. Veterinary breeding costs and so on, about another €120, €130 or thereabouts. And then the rest of it is facilities, it's machinery running costs and so on. So you're looking at, a very wide range of costs there from farm to farm. But the important point for the day is that €1,000 per cow is a well-managed, efficient system. That can be much, much higher. And we looked at the efficiency metrics within that, where you have, poor calving rate, for example. You have your cost of your cow per weanling produced is much, much greater. If your feed costs increase, for example, if you don't have clover in your sward, you increase feed costs. Age at first calving is going to have a huge impact on that, So if we look at our baseline system, whereby we have, a 2-year-old calving system, if you calve at 3 years of age, you're going to add €100 or thereabouts to that. So, all of these efficiency metrics will add to that. And, in an extreme scenario, you're probably looking at €1,500 per cow plus, and that's just taking the calf to weanling stage. If you look at a fully integrated system per cow unit, then again, it's much, much greater than that again, So yeah, lots and lots of debate on the day in relation to the cost of carrying the cow.
You've probably touched on some of them there. Sorry,
I've just put in the open day brochure there into the chat, so just so people have time. I know we have about 10 minutes left, but it's just so people have time to actually click on the link before the webinar ends. Sorry, Catherine, for interrupting there. Go ahead.
No, you're going. It kind of links with what you'd said there, Paul. Like that €1,000 could end up being 1,500. There's a good few questions in relation to what would be the key thing that they would focus on to improve profitability on a beef enterprise without increasing costs. Like I know you mentioned a few of them there. Maybe what would be the key 1 or 2 points that a farmer should focus on?
Yeah, I think I go back to Pearse give a very good response in terms of labour efficiency measures that can be taken on farm, and some of them require investment for sure. But there are also a lot of the old management practices, the old blueprints or the old measures that we would have spoken about, if you like. So age at first calving, for example, is one where you don't have that extra group of animals on the farm. If you look at your compact calving, thereby you have more compact groups, more of your activities are carried out with single groups of animals. If you have protracted calving throughout the spring into the summer, then you have different interventions in terms of disbudding, castration, vaccination, dosing. All of them have to be carried out multiple times because you've calves at different stages. So simply having a planned, well-managed, efficient system of production can have a huge impact in terms of labour. And it also contributes to profitability within the system. So yes, there are modern technologies, if you want to call them that. Pearse mentioned the collars, the virtual fencing, and they will all come and they will all help. Obviously, there's an investment required, but for part-time farmers, that investment will probably be considered worth it. But there are also a lot of the standard management practices that can go a long way towards helping the system to be more streamlined.
One of the things that came into my head there earlier on, just during your presentation, it was very stark, was the difference between turnout weight and the second winter housing date, and the huge gap between the top farms and the less efficient farms. Is like, if you had, trying to say, if somebody came into you and said, give me one thing to start with, if there's one thing to start with to try and make inroads on that big gap, what would it be?
Yeah, I suppose, Cian, the guys have an enormous body of data and they're pulling that together. But some of the early indications, let's say, if you look at the dairy beef, for example, the gap is very obvious even at the end of the first grazing season. And for both systems, what we're seeing is that there is a divergence early in life, and that divergence becomes greater throughout the lifetime of the animal. So in other words, getting a good start, getting that animal off to a good start is really, really important. We generally get that in dairy beef, in the suckler systems. Yes, there's variation in cow milk and things like that. Creep feeding can help, and that transition around weaning and so on is really important from a health point of view, as well as maintaining animal performance. Dairy beef, there's definitely more that needs to be managed in terms of intervention and feeding, nutrition and health and so on. So that gap in the first winter was quite noticeable and then widened. What we found, I suppose, as well, and again, this has all been pieced together, is that there's a variation in winter feed quality. That forage quality in the first winter it's something we've looked at in the past, and it came up again here as part of this project and the survey that was done as part of this project. That winter feed quality is very, very variable, and that requires either adequate supplementation or maybe in future years taking steps to improve winter feed quality. The overall environment, housing environment, not just space allowance, but head space allowance. Is there enough head space allowance, particularly if there is supplement, and there normally is some supplementation at the feed face, at the barrier. Quality of or access to water, sufficient water and clean water. It seems very, very simple, but some of these very simple management practices or measures are issues that are coming up in terms of those lower performing farms. Genetics obviously always is part of the story. We're teasing that out a little bit more because, as you can imagine, you're going from farm to farm where there's a very wide mix of genetics on individual farms even. So trying to tease that out again. But look at it, it's multifactorial, Cian, and some of the old messages that we've had are reoccurring again here. But one of the key things to me anyway was that early life divergence is very obvious and becomes greater throughout the lifetime of the animals. And what's important here is that, that 150 kilos in the second winter for the sucklers, or 100 kilos for the dairy beef, that's at a farm level. That's the top 25% of farms versus the bottom 25% of farms. So we'd expect that at an animal level. You'll get that natural variation in animal performance. An animal gets a setback or something happens or whatever. But at a farm level, it indicates there's something more, I suppose, systemic happening there. And it's just a matter now. And we have two world scholars. I mentioned the guys in the presentation, Tomas and John. And they're just looking under the bonnet now to try and get to the detail of this.
That's great. Thanks a million. That's a very comprehensive answer, Paul. Back to you, Catherine. Have you another question or two there?
Yeah, I think you've answered a good few there. There's a lot in relation to genetics, Paul, so a lot have come in on that question from that point of view. Pearse, I think this might be more geared for you. I'm a dairy beef farmer. What Teagasc advisory services are available to help me improve my farm efficiency? Who can I contact?
Yeah, listen, so it's a good question. Thanks, Catherine. So there's a Teagasc there, local Teagasc advisor. I'd say the first protocol is, if you're a Teagasc client, sees that a discussion group is one of the first things a lot of people should be doing, But if you haven't got time for discussion groups, there are a lot of events Teagasc run. We're running them throughout the year. If you can take the opportunity, and I know we talk about people taking time off work to work on the farm. I think people need to also take maybe a little bit of time to attend things like farm walks and farm events and open days and different things like that, like last week. But again, if you don't have time for that, we've moved more and more towards the online stuff, like this morning webinars and different things like that. And there's a lot of webinars there now, and not just from Teagasc. I'd say, there's a lot of other organisations and semi-state bodies and farming media and that are also putting out really good material there around the whole technical stuff. So, and yourself, Catherine, the podcast, the Beef Edge, we'll give that a little bit of a plug this morning too, and, we know from that we're getting big numbers listening into that every week. And it's, 15, 20 minutes of an update. And if that's all the time you have, and because we know people, as I said earlier on, are time poor, and even getting the time, and we know this from working with clients, even getting the time to meet people who are working off farm as a Teagasc advisor can sometimes be difficult. So, if that client can tune into a podcast, that sometimes can spark something in them. Go, do you know what? I'm going to pick up the phone tomorrow and ring my Teagasc advisor. I heard on that podcast there yesterday evening as I was driving home something about soil fertility or improving grass silage or some new scheme or whatever, and some opportunity that's there. So there's compared to 10 years ago. We talk about technologies on farms, but compared to 10 years ago now, there's a huge amount of information now that are out there. And for a lot of people, we recognize it's no longer a lack of information. It's about direction. So that is where you do probably need to stand back. And I'm just thinking to our farm walk in Tuam last night, one of the key messages was, you need to stand back and plan and give a bit of time to planning. And sometimes we're going hell for leather, very, very busy, off farm, on farm. And that, but we stood back and looked at it and maybe got a second pair of eyes or a third pair of eyes, and that's where your Teagasc advisor can come in. But that's also, if you did have time for a discussion group, that's where a discussion group can come in too, and help to give you a 10 pairs of eyes to stand back and look at your farm with you. So I'd say, give it a little bit of time to plan, and sometimes a day or two doing that can set you in the right direction for the next 5-6 years.
Yeah, and I suppose there's also the demonstration programs there. If it was a suckler farmer either, like there's great options through Future Beef to follow the local farmer.
Loads of demo farms all around the country, and just keep your eye out and open those, and loads of information on them on our website as well. Yeah.
That's great. Thanks, Pearse. Back to you, Cian.
Yeah, look, we're coming up towards a finish there, and look at comments coming in there about really positive comments about the presentations, and there in particular the importance of efficiency and work-life balance. And I think that has become such a huge focus on it on the farms, and you can hear it in what you're putting across there at the moment. Do you want to chance one more question? Is it Catherine before we finish up?
Yeah, perfect. That's great. Thanks.
One more.
So I suppose looking at the presentation, Paul, you mentioned an awful lot of figures, particularly around the kilos, the CO2 per kilo of beef. Is there any comment in just relation to the sustainability survey that was released in 2025? Where are the figures presented today? That you had 11.51 on average is that an average figure for suckler to beef, or can you just give an update on that figure?
Yeah, I think and again, this question was raised on the day. So the figures that we have, and there's more detail, and Cian has put the detail of the booklet on the chat. So it's really important if people have specific questions like that to go back into the booklet, and they'll all be addressed very comprehensively there. So in the survey, the carbon audit survey that farmers may have been doing as part of their QA, so as part of their beef quality assurance scheme or SPLAS as it is now. So we have Board B, Origin Green audit. The figures that are given there are on a live weight basis, so it's emissions per kilo of live weight. Whereas the figures I had on the slide, now we have both in the booklet, but the figures on the slide was on a carcass weight basis. So when you present the figures on a carcass weight basis, the numbers tend to be higher because you have less carcass weight than you have live weight, obviously. But in the booklet, we have both on a carcass weight and on a live weight basis. So the live weight is always very useful because, in fact, the majority of farmers are selling a live animal rather than an animal to a factory. So a live weight figure allows you to compare across farm systems. But the ultimate figure for an animal when it's finished is the carcass weight figure. So that's the one that that was on the slides. But again, both are in the booklet.
Yeah, and Paul, all that information is contained on the booklet, isn't it? I have one here on the desk. It's a very comprehensive booklet, and there's loads and loads of information in it. So really worthwhile. You can click on the link there. I would imagine you could probably get them through your local Teagasc office as well. They'll either have a supply, they'll certainly be able to get you if you prefer a hard copy rather than that. Yeah. I'd like to thank Catherine. Catherine, really, thanks a lot for your help there. Some of the questions coming in there, lots of questions coming in. And Pearse and Paul for your time and for your presentations this morning. Next week, we are joined by Joanne O'Connell. She's a project manager with Acres Burren Arran, and she'll be looking at landscape actions in action, collars, cattle and conservation in the Burren and Arran Islands. Thanks everybody for your time. Thanks a million for joining us, and we'll talk to you next week.
You've been listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, the weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. Don't forget to join us live every Friday morning for our latest webinar. For more, visit teagasc.ie. And you can also rate, review and subscribe to the Signpost Series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm Mark Gibson, and thanks for listening.